let's stick with you, Peter. Stay there if you will, because I want to follow up as we start to explore some of the questions that underpin to today's debate. And you got to the heart of that with your pitch, and I want to push you a bit more on it, on what's the point of goods when we've had enough? And at some level, you can see that, you know, once you've got shelter over your head, once you've got enough food to eat, once you've got clothes that will keep you warm, you know, how much is there really beyond that? But I was struck by one particular word that you used, which was the word frivolous, to describe at least, you know, some consumerism. Isn't the reality that human beings need some frivolity in their life? The life that you've described of buying in a sort of utilitarian way, you know, what one needs, but not necessarily beyond that, is of course sufficient in terms of needs, but is it enough in terms of, you know, people's wider happiness? Don't people have some kind of right or need to go beyond what's simply necessary for everyday survival?
Well, I've never said, or never intended to say, that people should only focus on needs. You know, of course, the basics are important, but, you know, the basics, you know, I think beyond the mere, you know, the mere 2,500 calories you need, I think, you know, I'm all in favor of people having a beer or a wine or a chocolate cake or whatever. It's fine, you know, I'm not against that at all. I think that people should be able to have fun and enjoyment in their lives. I'm just questioning the extreme degree to which, you know, we have moved, where, as you said initially, people have clothes in their closets that they've never worn for years and years, and, you know, why not recycle them? Every now and then I give my clothes to a charity shop, and some of them end up being taken up, snapped up by people. I once bumped into someone who was wearing an item that I left in a charity shop. They looked perfectly fine. The item was pretty much just as good as you get brand new in a store. Why just hoard it, or why throw it away? You know, this throwaway culture, I think, is a mentality is just so wrong. It's contributing to the ecological crisis that the planet faces.
And of course, without, you know, trivializing the issue, it's worth noting that in recent years, the idea of vintage fashion has actually become much more trendy. The idea that people do realize that reusing and recycling, particularly, I have to say, your 1980s clothes, which of course now are absolutely at the height of what young people are looking to wear. So what goes around comes around in that.
And you know, I have several ties that were bequeathed to me from my late father. They were very fashionable in the 1930s and 40s. And they've come back to fashion now. So, you know, thank heavens he didn't throw them away.
We just have to wait long enough, clearly. Deirdre has been dying to come in. Deirdre, please, put you right in.
A small point on this matter of clothing. Yeah. For the last 3 centuries, so-called capitalism has organized an enormous market in secondhand clothing. You will find in the now poor parts of the world, and those are often improving, thank God, the very clothes that you disposed of in London. And it's not happened through the government. It's not happened through any kind of compulsion. It's happened because, as you point out, Peter, when coat is slightly worn and is handed into the secondhand clothing store, it's still perfectly okay for someone else, and that kind of matching of consumption with availability is what the so-called capitalist market does.
Okay, but Deirdre, could I push you on that? Because sure. I'm still very surprised so far in this discussion, we haven't had a name which at least amateurs like me would have thought would have been right up at the top of this debate. And that is the name of the lost but not forgotten Thorstein Veblen. In other words, the inventor of the sociological idea of conspicuous consumption. And we remember the phrase today, even if we don't necessarily remember the sociology. Along with the idea that, as an economist, you will know better than most of us, the idea that people buying what are sometimes called positional goods, in other words, things that are there for a particular purpose of social display, social status. Are these ideas, conspicuous consumption, positional goods, these sorts of things, part of something that we should be condemning, or are they actually part? So there's a no. Tell me why not. Why not?
They're human. Early in the history of Homo sapiens, we find evidence of ornamentation. In fact, I could go into the archaeological details, but I won't. I gave you the example of polished stone tools. So we're like that, and it's not evil. And as far as positional goods are concerned, I would ask everyone who hears this to examine their own consumption and ask themselves how much of it is actually keeping up with the Joneses, or indeed trying to shame the Joneses. And I own 8,000 books. That's not because I'm trying to show people that I'm superior to them in knowledge. I haven't read most of the books, for one thing.
You probably wrote most of them, Deirdre, judging by your productivity, but that's a different matter.
Thank you kindly.
Bhaskar, could I bring you in on this question? Conspicuous consumption, it does seem to fulfill some sort of human need, as Deirdre is making out. Shouldn't we acknowledge that rather than try and deny it?
Well, yes, I'm less interested in questioning people's consumption. I'm more interested in the conditions in which people are treated when those goods are being produced. And I do think there's a contradiction in what Peter is saying. He's saying that in medium to relatively high income countries like Taiwan, like they are happy and they consume less than we do in, let's say, the United States. But how did these countries become medium to high income countries? They became medium to high income countries through having developmental states and also constructing firms that export to the West. So the fact that we swap our phones every 2 years, instead of hanging on to them for 5, 6, 7 years, it benefits producers in Taiwan, and also has allowed the quality of life that we've seen grow and develop in a lot of these countries. So, I think fundamentally having this be a discussion about what is enough, what isn't enough, and have it be about a discussion about consumption turns us into a zero-sum game. And also even this talk of us having, quote unquote, too much in the global north and not enough in the global south, again, turns wealth creation into a zero-sum game. And obviously, my vision of a just society, what we'll do with our abundance and our wealth, is probably closer to Peter's vision of a just society. But I do think that we need this shift in how we talk, to shift about production, and again, into the positive sum, away from the zero sum.
Peter, a brief reply?
Well, I think, it's undeniable that 20% of the world's population consume roughly 80% of the world's resources. The 80%, poorest 80%, are left with only 20% of the world's resources. Now, that kind of inequality cannot be justified, particularly when nearly 1 billion people on this planet are hungry or malnourished, without clean, safe drinking water or adequate sanitation. These are pretty basic fundamentals. And of course, one of the reasons why they are deprived is because the resources are not being put in to tackle that poverty. They're being put into the global arms race. Military spending is $2 trillion a year globally, and of course we have these ultra rich individuals who have unimaginable wealth, and they may claim to give bits away to charity, but really the idea that people have a dozen homes around the world, private jets, private yachts, and so on, I mean, this is obscene in a world where so many people are actually dying. Thousands of people are dying every day because of dirty water or inadequate food.
Deirdre, I'll bring you back in 1 second, but just to make sure that we kind of move where the conversation, I think, is going in terms of how we might address these questions, I'd like to move on with another question, and then we'll bring everyone back in. So not to worry, we have not heard the last word from anyone at this stage. Let's continue with Peter's theme, but Bhaskar, I want to turn it back to you again. The question of what you might call the morality of the, if you don't want to call it overconsumption, maybe overproduction is part of the issue as well. And of course, as you say, we need to think about ourselves and our societies and the wider forces as being both. So,
to continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.